The problem is they decided from day one, as Chuck Schumer said, we're going to go after this guy because he's criticizing us.
I just wanted to ask you about the Eric Adams thing. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened.
Yeah, what happened with Eric Adams is...
Let's go into that for a little bit, then we'll move into some gender
Can we
stuff.
agree 5 minutes on sort of the idea of corruption around Eric Adams?
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
The Eric Adams thing, I think there's many reasons. We've heard over and over that it's perfectly fine for the FBI and the DOJ to selectively prosecute. For all we know, Eric Adams was cooperating with them in things they thought were policy important. We were told over and over that that's completely legitimate when we saw the two-tier justice system that protected the enemies of Donald Trump, and then engaged in taking opposition research from them and weaponizing law enforcement in ways that this country's never seen. The corruption that we saw, the fact that we're going to talk about Eric Adams as an example of corruption, while literally the FBI was illegally spying on Trump's team, knowing that the information was coming from Hillary Clinton.
Are you talking about Crossfire Hurricane?
That's part of what I'm talking about. Relying on a suspected Russian spy under the accusation that Trump was colluding with Russia. Meanwhile, our FBI and Hillary's team were actually colluding with Russians in order to spread disinformation to illegally spy on his team. Yeah, I would say that corruption is far worse than the Eric Adams thing.
Real quick on Operation Crossfire Hurricane, I believe there was an Inspector General report of the DOJ that happened under Trump where they said mistakes were made, but they were not politically motivated. And getting to Eric Adams, the issue that I have here is a Trump-appointed U.S. District Attorney, Danielle Sassoon, resigned over this. Appointed by Trump in his second term. She is a staunch conservative. I think she's in the Federalist Society. Her and Hagen Scotton, these are die-hard Trump supporters appointed by Trump as district attorneys. And she says in her resignation letter, I attended a meeting on January 31st with Mr. Beauvais, Adams' counsel, and members of my office. Adams' attorneys repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo, indicating that Adams would be in a position to assist with the department's enforcement priorities only if the indictment were dismissed. Mr. Beauvais admonished a member of my team who took notes during this meeting and directed the collection of those notes at the meeting's conclusion. This is like cartoonish levels of corruption that are so bad that a Trump supporter is resigning over this.
I don't give a shit. Trump supporters like John Bolton, Trump supporters like Jeff Sessions, these were people that were so-called Trump supporters
that were Trump in his second term.
I don't care. I don't care. Just because George Bush,
on the validity
let me finish. Just because George Bush or Donald Trump appointed someone so they're Republican, we have to take their word at face value. That's not an argument to me because I've seen Trump. One of his weak suits is he appoints a bunch of people that are bad, right? So that's not really an argument that I take weight into. Secondly, let's say that the worst is true. Okay, so then what happened here? Trump wanted to deport illegals, so he wanted Eric Adams there. So he said, hey, we won't prosecute you if you help us deport illegals.
He wanted access to Rikers specifically.
I don't care. That pales in comparison to what the Democrats have done that are now complaining about this, that weaponize the entire legal system to go after Donald Trump, including those in New York. I don't give a shit. I'm tired of listening to people talk about these little drops and that, oh my God, this is corruption. This is corruption when they were silent or they actively participated in the blatant corruption that we saw against Trump for 8 years and Trump supporters. I don't care.
I'm guessing that all the indictments were corruption too.
What's that?
Are
you want to go through them one by one? Can we get to this debate to go through like 12 hours? We can go through all of these indictments one by one. No problem. I'd be happy to talk about each and every one of them. Is that what you want to do?
What's your issue with the classified documents case? Because that to me is the strongest one.
I think that almost every person in Washington has mishandled classified documents.
Sure. That's not what the allegation of obstruction of justice. They gave him a year to return everything.
That's not true. What they did was almost immediately, we saw NARA, a person who was in charge of NARA that was tweeting things like #resist. He decided on day one, oh, I wonder what's in those boxes. What happened was they decided that they were going to investigate Trump with a fine-tooth comb from the get-go. And then they had all sorts of things when Trump was reasonably allowing them in. They were like, well, you're not cooperating in this way or that way. FBI agents, you want to talk about resigning, wrote letters in private that they thought it was absurd that there was a raid on Mar-a-Lago because there was cooperation occurring. Meanwhile, we had Hillary Clinton's team, on the other hand, that not only mishandled classified documents, but then had a lawful subpoena, which they deleted, actually destroyed the evidence in an unrecoverable way. How many of them were charged with a crime?
To my understanding, none.
Oh, now which is what?
I'm not here to defend Hillary Clinton, just to be clear. We can do the whole whataboutism thing in circles for 12 hours, like you said.
It's not whataboutism. When you ask me specifically
your description of the case is inaccurate.
That's what I'll give you a chance.
National Archives I've read the indictment, gave Trump multiple months to return documents. He returned some. They returned some, and they said, this isn't everything. What else do you have? He stalled. They took a while before they even referred it to the DOJ, because at first it was just, hey, can you return these documents? Even then, my understanding is the DOJ gave Trump multiple opportunities to return these documents and not pursue any kind of criminal indictment. This only became a matter of obstruction of justice when there was security camera footage and text messages found of people that work for Trump saying, he said, like, hide this box over here, or like, don't show this person this, as they're actively being investigated. The reason Mar-a-Lago was raided was because Trump refused to comply with subpoenas and actually turn over these documents. And again, Trump is on tape. He is on tape, recorded, showing people these attack plans on Iran and saying verbatim, if I was still president, I could have declassified these, but I'm not president anymore, so I can't be showing you this. Like,
so Adam conveniently, I don't know if you didn't understand or you're intentionally misrepresenting. My argument is this is a crime that almost everyone commits, and there's selective prosecution, which is antithetical to the entire foundation of our legal system. Please. Yes, this is a crime that's committed all the time, and it's antithetical to sort of have selective prosecution. Please, let me finish, please.
Yeah.
I sit there, right? Okay, so that's my argument. Now, he's going to say not everyone does it. Okay, then let's talk about his contemporaries that we can see. One, we know what Hillary Clinton did was worse. The FBI decided to give everyone immunity and go as easy as possible. She literally not only mishandled classified documents, which they knew for years, and allowed her to go, and you didn't have places like NARA or other record keeper places that were consistently demanding this information back. But when there was a lawful subpoena issued by Congress, they destroyed that evidence. Clear case of obstruction of justice. Everyone given immunity, no one charged. Selective prosecution, then that they decide to go after Trump. He then talks about things like this. He says about the cooperation. That's not true. There's stories that talk about how there were levels of cooperation. There were disagreements on specific files. But once this actually happened, the raid on Mar-a-Lago, not only did several FBI agents protest this and say they thought it was beyond the pale, but we can see the way they did this. You would think if you're raiding a president's home that you would have all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed. They were taking everything, like souvenir ball bats, napkins. They're taking everything, because the point was, as with every one of these stories, to go as hard as Trump. There's your person. Now find the crime. That's what they were doing. Last thing I'll say real quick. You talk about him on tape. After that procedure, it was Biden's DOJ that actually issued the orders to go after Trump. We now know that Biden himself not only committed the same crime and improperly handled classified documents, not only held it for far longer, including his time as a senator, not only was that as a senator something he would have never been allowed to take home, unlike Trump, but he actually admitted, you ready for this? On tape, this is probably classified and I'm not allowed to show it to you, but here, go ahead and read it. He literally did the exact same thing as Trump and then had his DOJ prosecute Trump. It's selective prosecution all throughout. The kind of mishandling classified information isn't that a big deal. However, the selective prosecution to try to influence politics.
The issue with the classified documents case is not just mishandling classified material. You're half right that probably every government official to some extent mishandles it. The issue is that he did not really cooperate with the government in returning them. The main charge there is obstruction of justice, not just, and the way we know this is the case.
Did Hillary's team cooperate?
Hold on. The documents that Trump returned are not part of the indictment. He wasn't actually charged for those, because it turns out when you comply and return the documents, you're not going to get charged, even though he technically could have been charged for mishandling. They didn't charge him for that stuff in the areas where he complied. And I want to ask you a broader question. Is it just like any time that Trump is indicted, it's like a political witch hunt, but then anytime a Democrat, like Eric Adams was indicted, Bob Menendez, like Democrats also face legal consequences for breaking the law. When it comes to Hillary Clinton, I would agree with you, actually. Like, I think these people should be held to account to a much greater degree, but I don't explain all of these discrepancies with some kind of like evil political deep state agenda, as much as just there's different prosecutorial discretion and different judges in different cases.
And there's the word. Every time I debate someone on this, they will write everything away as prosecutor discretion. So my answer, so let's take that to the logical. My answer when it comes to Eric Adams is prosecutor discretion. They have discretion to not pursue people, therefore no problem. Why do you automatically assume it's
legally?
Yeah,
they dropped the charges. Sure,
cool. So it's just prosecutor discretion. So what's this topic even about? Conduct. Secondly, did Hillary Clinton's team comply?
With what specifically?
When they were asked to return evidence.
No.
Did they eventually get the evidence that they requested of Trump?
With the classified documents case? I mean, they raided Mar-a-Lago and took
it. So they got it. Did they ever get it from Hillary?
Not to my understanding, no.
Was
I mean, I'm not
Trump's
super.
team- was
I also
Trump-
want to say I'm not super familiar with the Hillary case. Like 2016 was a while ago at this
Right.
point, but I'm taking your word that you're not
I'm
misrepresenting
familiar. I'm
anything.
familiar with sort of the talking points. Oh, prosecutor discretion. Oh, it was a long time ago. The point I'm
I
trying to
mean,
make is I don't
not a
think it's
talking point, it
particularly.
exists.
I don't think it's. There's all of these crimes that they're going after Trump for that he may have committed them. Right. My estimation is 90 to 95% of people at the national level of politics have committed all sorts of crimes. For example, I ran for Congress. I'll be honest with you. Some of the laws understanding campaign donations, you could
Be
run
careful.
afoul.
Don't incriminate yourself.
No, I took $0, so it didn't matter. But just
Okay.
looking into that's one of the reasons I intentionally took $0 because as a layman, right? But you could easily run afoul of those without intending whatsoever. It doesn't mean you didn't commit a crime. The problem is they decided from day one, as Chuck Schumer said, we're going to go after this guy because he's criticizing us. So in all of these states, you had people like Letitia James, people like Fannie Willis, you had people like Alvin Bragg, you had people like James Comey at the FBI, you had the people at NARA. All of them constantly are like, we investigate Trump more, investigate Trump more. They illegally spied on him. Meanwhile, when we have apples to apples comparisons, okay, in 2016, he's running against Hillary Clinton. She mishandles classified documents. She destroys them, or her team destroys them. Well, no problem. We're not going to charge any.
Legal cases are almost never actually going to be apples to apples. I think that does a lot of heavy lifting for your argument. The point that I'm trying to make here is, like, for example, I believe it was a judge in a red state that struck down Biden's student loan forgiveness before it went to the Supreme Court. And I wasn't out here saying, like, the Republican judges, the activist judges are coming after Biden. I think, like, respecting rule of law, even when it goes against people that I might support or policies that I might like, is important to do. And a trend that I notice with, I don't want to speak about you because I'm not very familiar with your content, but people who are Trump adjacent, is that it just always conveniently that every judge who goes against Trump just happens to be an activist judge. It's not like you're saying, I think the classified documents case and the Georgia case were strong, but I think the other case was weak. You're just saying, like, by virtue of Trump being indicted, that it speaks to some sort of, like, issue. And then it's like, okay, if it's in a blue state, that also, I guess, takes away all credibility, even though Democratic policies have been challenged in red states before, and that still stood. My issue here is not to say, like, every prosecution is always perfect, but it's this, like, reductive explanation of the evil deep state
It's not reductive when I can talk.
We'll respond to this, Rob, and then we'll move on.
My fundamental argument with politics is that there are bureaucrats and people behind the scenes that are really running things. And what they do is they aggressively go after people that they don't think would allow them to keep their hegemony on power. Right. So, for example, when you say, oh, this is just, it's prosecutor discretion, it was a long time ago, we can see the people that were running the FBI and NARA that were making these decisions were doing things like this. Peter Strzok talking about needing an insurance policy to prevent Donald Trump from winning. We could see that Kevin Kleinsmith was tweeting out #resist when he was later charged with the crime when he intentionally manufactured evidence to say the opposite of the truth to continue to get FARA warrants against Donald Trump. We could see that James Comey was talking about how he hated Trump from the get-go and was keeping notes on him and how he's holding Hillary mugs and actively cheering for Hillary. He even said that the reason that he was forced to reopen the Hillary investigation at the end was because a whistleblower spoke up because they weren't covering Anthony Weiner's laptop that had the, please let me finish. Please let me finish. And so his reason for reopening it, contrary to the popular Democratic narrative, wasn't to harm Hillary, but it was to help Hillary because he assumed that she was going to win and he didn't want this to be an albatross around her neck. Over and over again, we can see, I'm not talking about the judges, but the people at these agencies that are the real problem. The real problem is not Joe Biden. It's not Hillary Clinton. I don't give a shit. The real problem is, like Chuck Schumer said, we have the most powerful law enforcement agency in the history of the world in the FBI that Chuck Schumer, the opposition to Donald Trump, said Trump can't criticize them or well, they'll find 6 ways from Sunday. And now for more than 8 years, they've done exactly that. That's my argument. And we can see the selective prosecution. And that's more of a threat than how big of a deal do you think mishandling classified documents is on a scale of 1 to 10?
Just mishandling them, not the obstruction of justice part?
Yes.
Scale of 1 to 10, maybe like somewhere between a 4 to a 6.
Okay, so they're rating a former president over something you would say is a
obstruction of justice.
How bad do you think it would be if we have an FBI that's intentionally going after their opponents and then protecting the people they see as allies? How bad would that be on a scale of 1 to 10?
In the premise that you laid out, it obviously would be bad, but I obviously would reject that premise as being true, right? Because, like, again, when you talk about,
what did I say that was inaccurate?
When you talk about things like Operation Crossfire Hurricane, there was an inspector general investigation into this under Trump, and they said, yes, mistakes were made in terms of the process that were followed. But again, the issue that I have with what you're saying is,
you're misrepresenting what they said. He said in the summary of that, it's not even a problem of changing policy. Until the culture at the FBI is radically changed, no change in policy will matter. That's as scathing of an indictment as you could get. That's from the Durham report. That's from the Durham report.
Right, and that Inspector General report in 2019 said there was no political motivation. With
That's not what that said either. What it said was that they were unable to prove a political motivation. He was asked, if you want to go through this real quick.
Shouldn't you be able to prove it?
No, right? Because the Inspector General was asked, he had a 4-hour hearing, right? And he was asked specifically on this question. How do you explain? He said the absolute worst thing that he saw in the FISA abuse was as follows. That the FBI kept saying, we've talked to the primary subsource one, a man that would be a suspected Russian spy named Igor Dashenko. Right? They got 2 warrants without talking to the subsource. The 3rd warrant, they went to the FISA court and said, we talked to Igor Dashenko and we think he told the truth. So then they got a 3rd FISA warrant. The Inspector General goes, what was so appalling about this was, you know what he told the truth about? He said, wait a minute, that was all bar talk. I don't have proof of any of this.
Wait. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the FBI investigation into this start because of a tip from an Australian official about like George Papadopoulos?
Well, supposedly now we're seeing evidence that actually Brennan was saying in notes that actually they were telling in July before this started, they were saying that Hillary Clinton had a plan to tie Trump to Russia. And that was going to be part of our, right. But at the end of July, I believe the official start date was July 31st. We will find out if evidence is released that they actually started the investigation before then. Nonetheless, yes, if you want to go into the story of Alexander Downer, we can. Irrelevant to what I'm talking about the IG. So I'll just finish this point. Imagine that they have to tell the FISA court the truth. They say, we finally talked to the guy. He told the truth, but they left out. Oh, and what he told the truth was that this whole case was bullshit. And he's like, that is unthinkable. It's unconscionable. And the Democrats that were questioning kept saying, but you didn't find every proof that it was politically motivated. And he said, no. Finally, a Republican says, other than the most grotesque incompetence that you can imagine, or corruption and political motivation, can you think of a third excuse for why this happened? He said, no. And they said, so you're not saying it's not political corruption? He said, that's not what I'm saying. My job's only to recommend charges. I can't say that it rises to the level of corruption. So you're misrepresenting.
I think this comes down to just like a view of the world difference where you attribute things to malice, where I would attribute them to probably just like honest mistakes with some malice sprinkled in there as well. But
what's the honest mistake of that?
Good time to move it on, I'd say.